Hi, it's me again, and I talked about this briefly over on my main channel, but I thought I'd just touch on it on its own little video on here, not for a long one, because I've been filing a few FOI requests to the BBC, and one of them was about this, and I can't really understand the response that I've got. Maybe some of you people out there can. This is what it was about. Mrs. Brown's Boys slammed as drivel by viewers as iconic BBC comedy returns. Angry BBC viewers have ripped into Mrs. Brown's Boys and branded it totally unfunny after the controversial TV show returned to screens for the first time in 10 years. Not including Christmas specials. It's like a proper series of it they've made. And from what I gather, there aren't that many fans of it left. I mean, it's not one of the greats, is it? I'm sure there are people out there that would consider it one of the greats, but you're not putting it up there with Only Fools and Horses and Fawlty Towers, are you, as BBC sitcoms go? But I was interested to know, because it's the first time they've made a proper series of it for a long time. It's got a bit of a cult following probably within the BBC. How much did it cost them? That's what I want to know. So I popped over to the FOI website at whatdothayknow.com and I filed this. Look, a new series of Mrs. Brown's Boys has recently started being broadcast on the BBC. Please confirm the total cost for production or buying in the show. Now, the BBC is supposed to be totally open and honest. They publish their accounts. They publish the salaries of talent and staff at the BBC. They're supposed to be an open book, right? So if you're a licence fee payer, you pay your 159 quid a year. Surely it should be of interest to you, or even if it's not, you should have the right to know what the BBC are spending their money on and how much of it is being spent on what, right? Now, I'm not a licence fee payer or stakeholder in the BBC, I understand that, but many of you out there are, and I like to feel I represent you a little bit. So I want to get that information to share with you so you can decide if it's good value for your licence fees or not. How many licence fees, how many households paying the 159 quid a year were required to make a new series of Mrs. Brown's Boys, which is getting widely slated out in the world? So what do you think the BBC's response was? Well, it was this. If held, the information you have requested is held for the purposes of art, journalism or literature. The FOI Act provides that the BBC is not obliged to disclose this type of information and will therefore not be disclosing any information requested to you on this occasion. Right, so they're copping out saying they don't have to answer the question if the money was spent for the purposes of art, journalism or literature. Okay, but Hugh Edwards, who is a journalist, or was a journalist with the BBC, and the other BBC News presenters' salaries are published yearly by the BBC. So how can you publish those when that comes under journalism? You can publish those. So let's have a think about this. So Mrs. Brown's Boys, a widely known, not very good sitcom. Is it literature? No. Is it journalism? I'm going to have to say no on that as well. So that leaves us one option. So that means the BBC consider Mrs. Brown's Boys as art. Now, I'm no art expert, never will be, not full time anyway. I don't understand quite a lot about art. You tell me, do you consider Mrs. Brown's Boys as art? Because the BBC do. So what do you reckon about this? You know, every time I file an FOI with regards to anything financially related, the costs of anything, BBC always knock it back. Always knock it back. But how can they knock it back based on art, journalism or literature when they publish their journalists' salaries? They tell you how much they spent on the new BBC News studio publicly, and yet they won't tell you how much they spent on this, because they consider Mrs. Brown's Boys art. Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. Hit the buttons below, and hopefully I'll get to see you in another video again soon, won't I? Ta-da.